are Music Student 101. And we are on a quest for musical knowledge. Our intentions? To share what we learn along the way with you, our listeners. Today we continue our discussion of diatonic seventh chords with your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
Hey, Jeremy.
Hey, Matt, we are back.
We are back and back in it.
Indeed we are, man. What is new? What have you been up to? You have 1 or 2 more weeks of summer left, don't you?
I got a couple of weeks before classes start. Those couple of weeks are going to be, I'm going to be hip deep in syllabi and course planning and all of that good stuff. And trying to eat up the last of our peaches and
before
they go away until next year, and yeah, so that's my life right now.
Right. The state of Georgia claims the peaches, but until you had the Chilton County peach.
I tell you, until you've had an Alabama Chilton County peach, it's the best kept secret in the South.
This podcast paid for by the Alabama.
Paid for by Chilton County. Seriously, go check out some Chilton County peaches. You'll thank yourself.
I had a pretty harsh run-in with the summertime a couple of days ago myself. There was a shoot at the University of Tuscaloosa, at the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa.
And only people from Birmingham call it Alabama at Tuscaloosa.
Right.
For the rest of the world, it's the University of Alabama, the Crimson Tide, national champions.
Exactly, and that's why I was there. Normally, when we're out there on the field covering the practices, sometimes I do sports audio. Yeah. And when we're out there, they're like, okay, you got 15 minutes, get what you need, take this microphone, get off the field.
Yeah.
And but this time around, they had some kind of deal with the school where they're making kind of a reality shoot of the training program and everything.
Interesting.
So they let us on the field for all 4 hours, and man, that was hot. Of course, I wasn't running around.
And you weren't even practicing.
No. With all the shoulder pads and everything. God. Yeah. Anyways, that was I'm still rehydrating from all that stuff. So if my theory brain is a little wonky today, we'll see how that goes.
Living in Alabama, I personally become a complete hermit and recluse and stay in the air conditioning for a good 3 or 4 months during that summer heat because I'm just not about it.
Oh yeah, people say, "How do you guys deal with this?" I'm like, "We don't. We just stay
air
inside."
Conditioning. We're sitting in a basement right now.
Yes,
a fully air conditioned underground place that we don't intend to leave.
Nope.
This is how we deal with it.
No flying kites today.
No.
Well, let's get into let us continue with our social moment that we have at the beginning of each podcast.
Yes, let's do that because we have some new reviews.
We have some new reviews, and I want to say something else real quick. I want to congratulate Mike Cunliffe, our announcer, because even though this is the 52nd episode, we didn't really get into it the last episode because it was a guest episode.
Right.
But that episode 51 with Chris Knutson, that was Mike's 50th episode.
Congratulations. Congratulations, Mike. He is a real trooper.
Indeed, and does a fine job with that crystal clean voice of his.
Yeah, give you a little break from having to listen to us. So we didn't have him for the first episode. That was just you.
No, actually, we had him for all those. There was one episode where we had Jerry sit in for him because Jerry Chapman sat in for him because him and Sarah were rehearsing for a play all that week.
I recall that.
And that might have been a little bit of poor planning on my part.
Well,
But it turned out to be a mitzvah anyways because Jerry did great and we still have Mike and all is well, Yeah. So thanks again, Mike. Bang up job, brother.
Indeed. And congratulations.
We have a new review. Let's see here. Now, this, again, came from the iTunes page because that's the main place I know of to find reviews.
Right, because we're old.
Because we're old, and that's all we know. But
iTunes is cutting edge to us. It's bad.
Now, dig this. This reviewer, Bohemian Rhapsody,
love that,
says, this is real music theory. Now, I just want to picture Brian May sitting down listening. These guys sound really good. I think I'm going to write in. But it's probably not Brian May from Queen or any of the
probably not
remaining members of Queen.
Probably not, but who knows? And even if you're not one of the remaining members of Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody.
We're not suggesting we'd rather Brian May than you.
Even still, we're very happy for your review.
Yes, let's hear that review.
So this review says, having just completed Music Theory 1 and 2, Oral Training 1 and 2. Ooh, congratulations on that. A milestone.
Truly.
I know for a fact. I'm teaching those classes, so I know what you mean.
You can see the struggles every day.
Oh, yeah. I was delighted to come upon this podcast. It reinforces what I had learned and comes at some things from a little different angle, which is great. Overall, it corresponded to my classes closely and was, at minimum, a great review, and far beyond that, an inspiration. Oh, thank you so much. As Matt and Jeremy clearly love music, that we do, there is a flavor of Fuchs's gratis ad parnasum. We actually mentioned that textbook, didn't we?
We did, man.
Yeah,
and I know this is the first time Matt's actually reading this. This is why I wanted you to read this.
Oh, that is so great. In their master-student relationship. Yeah, I can totally see that. We're maybe probably not as strict in the master-student relationship as Fuchs.
I hope not.
But then again, that was the freaking, God, when was that?
1700s?
So, yeah, there you go. It's not some watered-down idle chatter like so many podcasts, but real music theory thanks Brian May. I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody.
Exactly.
and seriously, thank you so much. One of the reasons we kind of sat down and thought this would be a good podcast to do back in the day is because listening around to music podcasts, whether I would describe them all as idle chatter, I certainly felt like it was true that it was difficult to find any that really dug deeply into music theory. So thank you. This is what we're trying to do. Love the Fuchs reference. Don't get that every day.
Yeah, isn't that a trip?
That's awesome.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, another thing real quick before we move on. Queen, there's going to be a movie called Bohemian Rhapsody coming out, I think, in November? November 2nd.
Definitely got to check that out.
Oh, the trailers are all over social media now.
Okay.
It's going to be a sight to behold, man. I'm really looking forward to that.
I can't wait.
Queen story.
Best band one of the best bands in rock and roll history.
One of the greatest voices of all time.
Oh yeah.
No one talks about John Deacon, the bass player, all that much. But
he's something.
He's got some really great bass lines.
Oh, we could do a whole podcast on the unsung heroes of the bass.
And speaking of which, we have a new Patreon patron.
Oh, yay! A new Patreon patron. So, Amon Kelly found us on Reddit, originally from Ohio and now in Baltimore, Maryland. Amon is a bassist. Our favorite instrument. But he's learning piano to really help understand harmony and chords better. I agree. I think it's a good thing for any musician really to practice the piano a little bit, and you don't have to become a virtuoso pianist, or you don't have to become Jordan Rudess or anything.
That's the keyboard player
from Dream Theater.
Right.
Become a parent in a minute.
Yeah.
But just purely for pedagogical terms, I am not a pianist.
Nor am I.
Yeah, no one would call me a pianist. I play keyboards on the podcast to explain what I mean.
Right.
It's a great pedagogical tool, and it can help you learn harmony very, very well. It can help you sort of work out musical ideas and things. So it's good to have some familiarity with it, whatever your musical pursuit is.
It's kind of laid out in a very pattern-oriented fashion, very visually obvious patterns.
Yeah.
You don't have to focus on tone or getting just the right tone before you even worry about notes. You just push the little key and it happens.
And you get the notes, yeah. So you can sort of learn those relationships between notes.
Go right into it. And speaking of going right into it, Amon says, I'm a big progressive rock/progressive metal fan, with my biggest influences being Dream Theater and more recently Hacken. But of course, growing up, it was classic rock, Led Zeppelin, Pink Floyd, The Doors, The Who, etc. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Given that prog is the music I want to make, I've been trying to hit theory from as many angles as possible, as the style pretty much mashes up as many techniques, styles, concepts as possible. Getting a better understanding of functional harmony from you guys has been very helpful, and I can echo the feedback that working through examples of dictation analysis really helps cement the material. He goes on to say, it's been great listening on the drive to and from work, where even though I can't practice, at least I can listen and exercise my theory brain.
Yeah, gotta keep that theory brain in shape.
I really love hearing a lot of our listeners are talking about the theory brain.
The theory brain.
When they write in. It's kind of cool. Keep up the great work, and I can't wait to hear more about the advanced harmony stuff, modulations, altered chords, modal interchange.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Amon, for the kind words. I'm a prog rock fan myself. I'm not afraid to admit it. I'm a Dream Theater fan. Those guys are, a band of virtuoso players. Five extremely good musicians who all got together, and yeah, prog rock does approach music from a theory perspective more intentionally sometimes than other musical styles. So it can be really good to help you understand that kind of music, to understand theory better.
Yeah.
And we'll be getting into some good Dream Theater-esque stuff. We've already talked about modulations, altered chords, modal mixture, all of that good stuff. We should talk about the modes probably a little more.
Maybe so.
Yeah, but thank you so much. This is a great feedback.
Yeah. Amon, in our exchanges, I was asking you about his name, and he says, yes, I am super Irish. Although his grandparents came straight off the boat. His family's been in America all the while.
Oh, man.
There's probably
his grandparents are immigrants, so he's Irish.
There's probably still a little detectable accent in Amon. I wonder if he's heard of Jasper Cole, my Irish band.
Definitely look him up. Jeremy plays in a pretty awesome Irish band, so, if you're into that.
Check him out, Amon. And Slancha.
Yeah.
All right, what else, man? Finally, we have listener mail.
Listener mail.
We have Antonio Rigo is from Ecuador.
Oh, nice.
This might be our first Ecuadorian.
Ireland and Ecuador, we are just getting so international.
Well, the episode 50, all we had was just people from like this, 3 or 4 states within each other.
Right.
So it's kind of cool to branch out here and read about the rest of the world. But yeah, he found us on Spotify, and more people are doing that too, so that's kind of cool. Maybe you guys can...
Yeah.
Obviously, you're already listening on something.
Yeah, don't be old like us. Check out.
Now, over the past 10 years, he's been self-taught in guitar, piano, trumpet, and sax, enough to jam on all of them, which is actually pretty great. Yeah,
that's pretty eclectic.
Mm-hmm. He refers to them as great puzzles.
Great puzzles.
Yeah, man.
That's a fun way to look at it.
It really is. And he's thinking about picking up the bass. He seems to be experiencing a quickening of sorts.
Oh, very nice.
We've been writing back and forth. Now, dig this. We've been writing back and forth a little bit, and he says, it was so weird when I read your email, I was hearing your voice from the podcast saying it. And he said, I wasn't expecting that. Weird, but kind of cool. So now
that's scary.
Now we're really going to mess with you, Antonio, because Matt...
Yes.
Is going to channel you.
I'm going to channel Antonio and read
his letter.
And read your email. So here we go.
With his voice.
Okay. Having no idea what Antonio's voice sounds like, it's just going to sound like me.
Yeah.
Okay. Lately, I've started to notice that my ear and my playing have become pretty in tune. And while I didn't know the names of the intervals or a lot of the chords I was playing, I've been able to use them to sound out a lot of things by ear, and naturally to get some of my own ever more complex music ideas out of my head and onto my instrument. That's great. That realization motivated me to actually learn to read sheet music and have been printing them out to practice every day. Bravo.
No kidding.
Antonio. Bravo. That sounds like you've taken a really huge leap into a great world there. This word, quickening, it interests me.
Yeah.
It interests me to sort of think about this in that terms. Because what he's describing in his email is a kind of quickening.
Yes.
Right? You're starting to hear things. So, you hear them enough to where you can figure them out on your instrument, and you start having ideas that in your mind was before just things that were sort of vague and not there, but once you can get them onto your instrument, they become sort of real. This is kind of like this is kind of like an awakening.
Yeah.
Right? This is kind of like a growing up into a musical world. When you're at the point where you can hear them, where you hear them enough to be able to pick them out on these instruments. That's great. That's a step forward. Another step forward. One day you'll be able to just sit down and listen to things and go, "Oh, I know what that is. I can imagine myself playing that."
Sure.
And once you're doing that, then you're living in this world of higher realization, right? You've become a musician.
You've arrived.
Yeah.
At the airport or the space station.
Yeah. And that's what it's like. Is you get to a point where you're not just doing exercises or playing scales or testing yourself on ear training software or whatever you're doing, but you get to a point where all this just becomes a part of the way you're perceiving music, and it all becomes sort of the same thing.
Yep.
And when you get to that point where seeing notes on a page and hearing notes and playing notes on instruments are all sort of aspects of the same thing, facets of the same polygon, then you're on your way to becoming a real practicing musician, someone with a lot of awareness of how music really does what it does. And quickening is a great way. Quickening is a great way to describe that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Moving up a belt.
Yeah.
In our red belt. Oh, man. So, he has more to say.
Okay. So, more. The printing out and everything, plus your podcast have become the best way to learn elemental musical concepts and have a much deeper understanding of the inner works of music. And engaging the theory brain, there we go again, has really made music a lot clearer to understand and easier to improvise/create. It's been amazing to get to that next level, and a big part of that is thanks to you guys. Well, we're so glad to have been able to help.
Indeed.
Now I'm getting greedy. I want to compose and arrange big band jazz brass /jazz brass being the ultimate goal. I don't know if anyone ever is going to play what I write, but I'll give that a shot. I know I need a good ear and a lot of theory working on it. I was wondering, how would I get there? I'm in a small town that doesn't really give a lot of space to art and culture, so the path is not self-evident to me at the moment. The only thing I know is that I should move in that direction.
Mm-hmm. That's all you gotta know, right?
Yeah, that speaks to my heart. I am from a small town that gave no space to art. No space at all whatsoever. I moved to a slightly bigger one. But I can definitely empathize with the idea, being a composer myself, of why am I even doing this?
Yeah.
Is anyone ever going to play it?
Yeah.
Is anyone ever going to hear it?
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of approaches I could take in response. One thing is to say, they definitely won't ever play it if you never get around to writing it.
There's that.
Yeah.
Nothing ventured, nothing gained.
Exactly. And in my experience, if you write it, it'll get played. If you write it, they'll come to it. And especially if you dedicate yourself to being the best music writer you can be, and it sounds like you're doing a great job of that already.
Yeah.
If you dedicate yourself to being the best songwriter you can be, then you'll start writing stuff that people want to play, and it'll get played. You may have to branch beyond your hometown. I certainly have had to do that. You may have to sort of pay your dues a little bit and struggle. But keep at it.
Who does a beginner submit their compositions to? I mean, maybe you can't afford to have a Philharmonic orchestra record your composition. Do you just send the music to somebody, or MIDI files, and to who?
Right. Yeah. We live in an age where we can get in communication with anybody, anytime, anywhere. Right. Go Google calls for scores, and look for jazz or big band calls for scores. There are resources online, composers.org and other things. Dig around, see what you can find. See what you can find with people willing to at least look at it. Apply to everything you think you stand a reasonable shot at getting, and see what turns up. In the meantime, seek out performers. The more trumpet players and sax players and guitar players and things that the more likely you are to get your music into the hands of people who will play it passionately. If getting a big band to play your stuff is a little ambitious right now, think about writing for a jazz trio.
Yeah, okay.
That's
Start
just
small.
yeah, that's just 3 people.
Yeah.
They're going to play a gig at some point where they're playing 100 songs anyway. One of them might as well be yours.
There you go, man. 3 textures. Totally.
Yeah. Be your own best advocate.
Uh-huh.
Be your own biggest fan, and things will come. And also, don't write music for the sake of getting it played.
Okay.
There is that that sort of bespeaks of an outward goal. We want to write music because we think, well, I want to write music and I want my music played and listened to, and I want people to go, hey, I really love your music, and get all this validation and
Maybe some Skrilla for it.
Yeah, and get paid for it, and and yes, of course, we all want that. I want that.
I want that.
Everyone wants that. But when you're asking yourself, why should I do this? The answer has to be an inner answer, an internal answer. You're doing this because it is where your bliss is.
Such is the case for Antonio, it sounds like.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. This is as much an inward journey as it is an outward journey. And do the inner stuff first, and then the outward stuff has a way of coming together.
Mm-hmm. The only thing else I'll say about Antonio before we move on to this episode is he's actually practically written. He's given us ideas for about 5 more episodes in this last little bit. He says he's also curious about chordal harmony, non-functional harmony, jazz composing, arranging for brass, setting career goals and expectations, meeting and collaborating with new musicians, networking around your craft. He's got all these great ideas. I'm like, oh, I'll have to pay you royalties for this one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm good with chordal harmonies and non-functioning harmonies and stuff like that. And then when you get into networking,
maybe
you're getting into things, I should be better at.
Yeah, right. Maybe we can all learn something on that one.
Yeah, no kidding.
All right, now, what are we talking about today?
What are we talking about today? Well, we had an episode quite a while back.
Episode 32.
Episode 32, in which we talked about 7 chords.
Our first episode officially on 7th.
On 7th chords.
Yes.
Specifically, 7th chords in functioning tonal harmony.
Right.
We did the 5/7 and the 2/7, and they're different inversions.
And why did we do those? Because they seem to be the most common and the most often functional?
Yes, absolutely. They appear first in the music lexicon. Bach is using both of those chords.
Yeah.
So they're the most common, the most easily functional, and so forth. But there are others.
Well, that's what this episode is called, The Others. And
Others.
I got to thinking about that show Lost, where the original cast crashes in the airplane on the island, and they all kind of know each other. They're all in a community.
Yeah, but then there's all those other people.
And then it turns out there's the others.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
Oh, yeah, right.
Too soon. That show went off the air in like 2006.
Yeah. Hopefully you've seen it by now.
Hopefully you've seen it if you care.
If you care. If you don't, then... Anyways, so yeah, that's just their least familiar chords, so... We're going to spend the whole episode talking on the remaining chords.
On the remaining chords.
And the order of what is considered to be the most common.
And down to what is considered pretty rare.
Yes.
And pretty, you have to squint at them pretty hard in some cases to even call them functional.
Right, as we discussed earlier off the microphones.
We have great off-the-mic discussions.
We should start recording those.
We should. That would be a good Patreon thing.
Yeah, right.
To just discuss us talking about music and beforehand. Jeremy is trying to get me to rehearse the show notes for the podcast, and I have zero interest. I go off on some theory tangent, and like counterpoint versus harmony.
Yes. Yes, that's a big one.
That's a big one, and how to approach teaching harmony. But we digress. Again. As
we do. So the good news about this is, and real quick, those chords we're going to be talking about in order today will be the 7/7 chord.
7/7.
The 4/7.
4/7.
Then the 6/7. The 1/7. And then the 3/7.
And then the 3/7.
And the good news is we got a lot of the theory and voice leading rules out of the way in episode 32.
Yeah, so this is just this is a little bit theory light because all of that stuff that applies to the 5/7 and 2/7 from episode 32, the different inversions and their sort of places and functions, will apply to other 7 chords too.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And all the same rules that apply to the triads of these chords also remain the same when it comes to voice leading and progression and
right, yeah. The ways in which they kind of want to move that being 7 chords doesn't really change very much of that. So so we're in pretty decent shape with that.
So there might be a little bit of theory, but mainly we're just going to talk about how these chords make us feel.
How these chords make us feel.
We're going to give them a good listen.
Man.
Totally. Give them a good listen and see what they do to our psyche.
Indeed. That's going to be cool.
So let us begin.
All right. So let's begin with the 7 chord.
The 7/7.
The 7/7. We know that a 7 chord, so if I'm in good old-fashioned C, we know that a 7 chord moves to 1. Right?
Yep.
If I take that 7 chord, and this is currently a 7/6/5, by the way, it's in first
inversion.
Yeah. And add the diatonic scale degree 6, right? Then I'm going to get a 7 half diminished 7 chord.
Okay.
And like we discussed in episode 32, the 7th chord, the 7th note, the 7th of the 7th chord is going to want to resolve downward. Yeah. So as this chord moves to the tonic chord, let's see, we're here. Yeah. Then that 7 resolves down.
And to someone who says, wait a minute, I thought the 7th, the leading tone was supposed to resolve up. Well, this isn't the leading tone.
Yeah, this isn't the leading tone. The leading tone is the root of this chord,
yeah,
i.e. B here in C major. The 7th of this chord is A.
Right.
So the chord is B, D, F, A. B half diminished 7.
So that A is going to want to go down to G.
Want to go down to G, which is, of course, the 5th of the tonic chord. And so the chord moves to the tonic. The 7 resolves down to scale degree 5. Everything's nice and pretty.
And because it's the 7th of the chord and not the 7th of the scale.
Right. Yeah. So it's a great little way to add a little more color to that because, to some extent, this is kind of a colorful chord anyway, right? But, you throw in that diatonic note and you get even more dissonance there, and so it's got a great sort of depth to it and color to it.
So let me just to be sure. Can we spell out this chord and talk? Is this the fully diminished or half diminished?
This is the half diminished.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and again, just recap on the half diminished.
Okay, half diminished meaning that the 7th is in fact a minor 7th from the root.
Okay.
So B up to A is a minor 7. Whereas in fully diminished 7, that would be a diminished 7. If I were to go,
oh yeah, can we hear the difference?
Yeah, if I were to go, and this would be going outside of my key, right? Which we can do that. We're talking about chromaticism these days.
Yes, we are.
And we'll talk about modal mixture and all that. But if I was to go outside of the key and do A flat, which would be a diminished 7 up from B. Even more color. Yeah. But the same rules would probably still apply. Fully diminished 7 chords are tricky. We'll talk about them in a little bit.
Right.
But yeah, that would be even more color to add.
Very cool, man.
Yeah.
So
did we cover all of that? All right, so some voice leading things. Because there are 4 parts, 4 notes, B, D, F, and A, or in whatever key.
Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th.
Root, 3rd, 5th, 7th. We don't need to double anything to make a 4-part texture.
Kind of cool.
Yeah. If so, there's technically no need for doubling. If for voice leading considerations, we kind of find that we have to, and it's kind of funny how often this comes up. We can omit the 5th. The reason we can omit the 5th is if we have the root and the 3rd and the 7th then we kind of can hear what that chord is supposed to be, right? We're not going to be too confused. Whereas in a simple triad, if we omitted the fifth, I think we may have talked about this at some point. It leads to confusion. What chord is that really?
Sure.
Right. We don't really have a full chord, so we're kind of confused. In this one, we have enough stuff to imply that 7 chord. So if we need be, we can omit the fifth.
Yes. So the root tells the kind of the chord member, the function or the actual chord name.
Yeah.
The third determines the quality. You got to have that.
Yeah.
And without the seventh, it's not a 7th chord.
It's not a 7th chord. And that 7th, the reason we can omit the fifth really is because that 7th, that interval is going to tell you what the root is.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, the note that's a 7th away from this note, or if you were to invert it, a major second up, that second in there, that is going to tell you, well, this is the root.
Yep.
It's going to tell your ear, well, this is the root. Mm-hmm. So your ear is not going wandering around, well, what is the root? And so this is why we can omit the fifth and the 7th chord. It's less of a good idea in a triad.
Very good.
So, and as I said, the 7th must resolve down a step, at least in classical music, classical tonal harmony theory.
We're going to be saying this more and more as we continue, I think.
I think we are, and we're going to we're at a key point of divergence between like classical music and other popular music styles.
Mm-hmm. Jazz and so forth.
Well, jazz is a great example. In jazz, the 7th is almost really just considered a consonance in itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not considered a dissonance that has to resolve any more than the 3rd or the 5th is considered a dissonance that has to resolve. Mm-hmm. Right? When you're playing jazz, that chord is consonant and stable in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can go to other 7 chords. Yeah, that are every bit as, So for that reason, when you don't see in jazz the need to resolve the 7th down a half step that you see in classical music.
Yeah.
And in pop music, was born out of jazz in a lot of ways, and yeah, it's same rule applies. Right. It's just because the 7th is just kind of considered a consonance.
It's just a pretty little thing that kind of floats by.
Yeah. Just another chord tone, like the 3rd or the 5th, really.
Very nice. And what's one more voice leading consideration for that 7th?
Ah.
But you quizzed me on it earlier.
I did.
I think it's worth mentioning.
I did. I did quiz Jeremy on it earlier. So when we're playing a 7 chord, for a chord whose root is scale degree 7, we should never double the leading tone. And we should never double that scale degree 7.
And I had to think about it for a second. Mm-hmm. But what did I come up with?
The reason is because, as we've discussed before, that root, kind of really wants to move up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if you double that, then you've got 2 scale degree 7s, both of which really have to pull upwards. Mm-hmm. And what have we created?
We've created the hideous, the infamous,
notorious
parallel octave.
Parallel octaves that have just destroyed our texture.
Which might sound cool in music, but in voice leading considerations, it's a big no-no. I think it can sound cool.
Well, it depends on what you want to call parallel octaves.
And what you want to call cool.
Yeah. We can get into that later.
Oh, didn't we say we wouldn't do as much theory?
Keeping it light. All right. So as we said, the same inversion symbols and rules still apply. So 7/7 with the little 7 superscript is going to be a root position 7 chord with scale degree 7 in the bass.
Right.
7/6/5 is going to be a first inversion 7 chord, which means the 3rd of that chord is going to be in the bass, right? And then we have a 7/4/3 chord, which is the 5th of the chord in the bass, right? And then a 7/4/2 chord, which the actual 7th of that 7 chord is in the bass.
And we did do a podcast on that.
And we did definitely do a podcast on that.
So we can move along, shall we?
Absolutely.
So the 7 chord in major keys is most commonly a 7 half diminished.
Yes.
Yes.
Diatonically, the 7 is half diminished.
Exactly. And in minor keys, it is more commonly...
Well, minor gets a little tricky.
Uh-huh.
Because are we talking about natural minor, harmonic minor?
Yes, let's do natural minor first.
Okay. So in natural minor, the 7th chord is actually a major chord.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Yeah. So, and it's actually a major minor 7 chord.
Major minor 7 chord, okay.
Which would also be considered a dominant 7 chord.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, you could, so... And end up in major 3. Real easy, right?
Yeah. Modulation techniques.
Yeah, modulation techniques. It's going to sort of confuse where you feel like tonic is, and in doing so, as we saw, getting to the relative major is just easy as cake with that, right? That's natural minor. Harmonic minor, what we're essentially talking about is, remember that harmonic minor, the scale degree 7 is raised, so that we have that half step relationship back up to the tonic. So if we do that, then we have a fully diminished 7 chord. Yeah, we have a full diminished raised 7 chord.
Yeah.
And it's pretty dark.
Yeah.
And it's pretty muddy.
It sounds more tense than
and when you resolve that to 1, you have a real sense of sort of sad anguishness kind of coming out of this chord, right? That all of that dissonance kind of in that 1 chord kind of pushing, to some kind of a dark place.
To a minor, which is almost considered dissonant compared to a major.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Sounded lovely though, I thought.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Okay, so let's talk about this. The 7 chords relation to the 5 chord.
Right. So we may have talked about this before. We may not have, but a 7 chord, a 7 triad. Just the triad without the 7, is just a 5 chord with a note missing, right? You add scale degree 5, and now we've got a 5/7 chord.
I see.
Right? So I'm just, sorry, this is our 7, B, D, F. I add G and have G, B, D, F, and that's a 5 chord, right? So in having removed this, melodically, we're just sort of placing some emphasis on that tritone, which is of course going to resolve, right? So this is really kind of why they tend to have the same function. They both want to move to 1. They're very, very similar. Yeah. When you're talking about a 7 chord, so if I, we've got this A in here. And it's going to want to move down to this G. Right. Pretty standard stuff. If I add a G to that, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah, 7. So that's the 7/7 chord.
Yeah. Well, that is a 5. That's actually a 5/6 chord. So depending on context, you would either call that 5/6, or you would call that a 5 with a suspension, with a 6/5 suspension. Because I'll do out the voices a little bit here. Whoops, let's try that again. If I were to, this is my 7 chord, and I have A, right?
Yeah.
If that A was instead G, so this is If that A were instead G,
Ah.
yeah, 5/7 chord, right?
Mhm.
But this is still A on top.
Uh-huh.
So is this 5/6, 5sus6, you know, or is it just a 5 of the suspension? It depends. If it go, you know, and resolved it down like that,
Mhm.
you know, and then probably moved back to you know, 1 or whatever. Then maybe call it a 5 chord.
Mhm.
Otherwise, we could call it a 5sus6 in sort of commercial music lingo. Or that would probably be a 5. It could be called a 5/9 chord in classical harmony. You know.
So in what circumstance would we look at this hunk of notes and say this is in fact a 7/7 chord?
Well, when it had those notes
Uh-huh.
and not a G.
Not a G. Okay.
Yeah, and you know if there's a G around there somewhere muddying up the waters, you know, then you've got to, you know, furrow your brows and decide what to call that G. And these are the kind of trials and tribulations that our friend Bohemian Rhapsody goes through in attempting to pass his music theory 1 and 2 classes. You know,
Right.
do we call that a suspension? Do we call it a chord tone? What do you have? Point being, there's a lot of crossover and similarity in the sort of musical purpose of the 7 chord and the 5 chord. They're both considered dominant functioning chords.
Yes.
Meaning that they will want to resolve to 1.
And they have many chord tones in common.
Yes.
And is it more common for a 7 to go to 5 or vice versa, and then to 1? I feel like 7 would go to 5 more common than 5 would go to 1.
You mean like would the 7 chord go to the 5 chord?
Yeah.
It can. I mean, for a 7 chord to quote unquote go to a 5 chord, you're really just adding a scale degree 5 somewhere. Right? So it can do that. When you're talking about a 7/7 chord, you know, it's got a little bit more of an identity of its own. And I could hypothesize, I've never really looked at it myself in depth, but I could hypothesize that the 7/7 chord has more of a tendency to go straight to 1 of its own and never really try to be a 5. You know, so, but yeah, it's just all about context.
Yeah.
You know.
Before we move on to the 4 chord, one more thing I'll say about the diminished 7th chord here is it is known to be intervallic.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
This is kind of cool, huh?
Yeah. So it is a chord made up of all minor thirds.
Yep.
So if I to stay with that same, and we're talking about the fully diminished 7 chord here.
Fully diminished, not half diminished.
Not half diminished, but fully diminished. If I stay with that same fully diminished 7 chord I've been playing, which is B, fully diminished 7, you know, we're going to go from B up a minor third to D, and then from D up a minor third to F, and from F up a minor third to A flat. Yeah, and then, you know, to go up a minor third from A flat brings us to C flat, aka B.
B. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is 4 notes that are all a minor third apart. This is what we refer to as symmetrical.
Yeah.
Meaning that of the entire chromatic scale, all 12 notes, it takes those notes and basically it splits them into even pieces, right? So if you imagine a clock face, and your root of the chord is on 12, which also doubles as 0, incidentally. And then your next note, your third, is on 3. And then your next note is on 6. And then your next note is on 9. We're just going up three half steps every time, right? So you have at 12, 3, 6, and 9, you have a note. And that has divided your clock face into equal portions.
4 equal portions.
Right.
It's like if those 12 notes were pizza, you'd cut it into 4 slices.
Yeah. It's exactly
4
like that.
equal pieces of pizza.
Yeah.
Each one being a minor third interval.
Yeah.
Fully diminished chord.
And we consider this a symmetrical set. And for that reason, there's a limited number of them, right? So we could have one that starts on C and can be C, E flat, G flat, A flat. 0, 3, 6, and 9. And then we have one that can be on C sharp, which would be C sharp, E sharp, G, and A. All of those just moved up 1, right? And then we can have one on D, D, F, A flat, and C,
Mm-hmm.
flat, and yeah, and then when we get back to E flat, it's just it's the same ones again, right? Just think of those notes that you have on your clock face moving, all of them moving, and after 3, they're going to get back to the same. So there's really only 3 transpositions of a fully diminished 7 chord. And because it is symmetrical, there is no clear root to a fully diminished 7 chord.
Right.
Any one of those, and you can mess around with inharmonic spellings and see this for yourself, but you can realize that any one of those notes could be considered that root.
Mm-hmm.
So they can then resolve to any note a half step away from any note in the chord.
Yeah.
Pretty cool when you think about it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And just like there's 3 possibilities for the fully diminished chord, the augmented chord, which we might talk about a little bit later on, is likewise a symmetrical chord.
Yeah.
Only it's dividing the 12 notes into 3.
Into 3 equal sections, and so there's 4 possibilities.
So it's more like a Mercedes symbol, pizza.
Yeah. Oh, math.
Mind-blowing stuff.
Yeah, don't go to doctoral school and study music theory, people. It's a crazy place.
Just keep listening to Music
Just
Student
keep
101.
listening to us. We'll break it down for you.
Hopefully we did a good enough job of that, because there was a time or two where my brows were furrowed. But we'll continue. Let's go ahead and move on to the 4/7.
Yeah, let's get out of this.
Now, 4/7 in the major key is typically a major 7 chord.
Yeah. Because diatonically, it is a major 7 chord in a major scale. Yeah. So if I'm in C major still, we're F, A, C, and E natural. Yeah. And like a 4 chord, it's going to move to a 5, which is then going to move to a 1. Right? I even get this beautiful kind of neighbor tone motion here.
Ah.
7 still has to resolve down, right? So it's less of a deal with a major 7 because it could resolve up. But that's it. So major 7 in a major mode. So and in a minor 7, it is diatonically speaking a minor 7.
Moody.
And sometimes, and we'll talk about modal mixture more as we move on. The subdominant, like the triad, wants to go to 5, or it can go to a 7 chord. Basically just a dominant functioning chord. Like the 4 triad, 4/7 will frequently pass through some kind of 2. Because again, 4 and 2 share a lot of notes in common, kind of like 5 and 7. So A4 or 2 going to A5 or 7, typical predominant dominant motion, right? So off point is the 4 will ultimately lead to 5. Occasionally it will lead to 5 through some kind of 2.
Okay.
Be it a 2 triad or a 2/7 in some inversion or what have you.
So even though it was I who compiled these notes, I still wasn't entirely sure what was meant by passing through 2. So let's visualize this.
Okay.
We got a 4 chord.
4 chord.
And is it pass through 2 in that it is a 4 then a 2 then a 4 then a 5, or is it 4 to 2 to 5?
It's 4 to 2 to 5.
Okay.
So 4 chord, like we've been doing, 4, 5, 1. I guess I could use my little pedal here.
Yes, you can.
Alternatively, 4 through 2. I'm even making it a 2/7 to 5 to 1.
Very good.
Yeah. Pretty, right?
Absolutely.
And then you hear just kind of that when we're falling down to the tonic, it just kind of delayed that for just a second, right? Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. It's great. And then, same principles apply in the minor mode. So we can go 4 to 5, 7 to 1. Or we can move from 4/7 to 2 diminished. It's going to be right. 2, 5, 7 to One. I've been ignoring our bass voice. Over
How could you do that to me, man?
Bass voice is not happy.
That was beautiful, though. I see what you're talking about. So basically, you're kind of using the 2 as almost a prolongation of the 4 because they're both predominant.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Prolongation is a good word. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good word.
Very cool, man.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the 6/7 chord. I'm a big fan of the mediants.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We love mediant chords. 6 and 3 are awesome. Mm-hmm. And you've probably picked up on this by now and getting a sense of what we meant earlier when we said that the basic rules and the basic roles that these chords play when they're triads, don't really change a whole lot when they become 7 chords. Mm-hmm. We're just adding that extra 7th note and a little extra color, a little extra dissonance, a little extra sort of flavor to our harmony to bring out a greater depth of emotion and more sublime palette to work with,
And that kind of wows me and comforts me at the same time because I would have thought adding that extra note would have caused all kinds of theory chaos.
We kind of got to call, yeah. There are definitely situations where adding notes are going to cause theory chaos. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, this does not appear to be one of them.
Yeah. 7th chords rock.
Yeah, now actually using these, remember these 7th always have to resolve down and things. So
there's that.
Actually utilizing them, you may end up having to create some chaos or something, but in concept at least, not a lot of chaos. Mm-hmm. So with the 6/7, and I'll just stay in good old C here. We're going to kind of take it easy today, and stay in good old C major. The 6/7 chord is a minor chord, A, right? Mm-hmm. A minor with a minor 7 on top. So it's a minor 7, a minor 7 chord. Minor triad, minor 7.
That's that chord that's real beautiful unless you're actually on a train track and you're about to get crushed by a train.
Well, I think what you're thinking of is probably the fully diminished 7 chord.
Oh, no.
Well,
that's when someone's tying someone down to a train track.
All right, yeah, all right.
The actual train whistle is a C, E, G, A chord, which can be interpreted as a C major add 6 or an A minor 7 in first inversion with that C in the bass.
Wow, see, you learn something new every day, huh?
How about that?
Yeah. So that's major. And, like we've been saying, so this can very easily go to 2 and then to 5. And pull us back out into that's great. It kind of sounds like it's pulling us out into sadness, out of sadness into more happiness.
Ooh, let's hear that again.
Yeah. So 6, 7, 6, 7 to 2.
Little resolution there.
Yeah. To 5.
Kind of lifts you up. Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of. That's pretty cool.
6, 2, 5, 1. A very common progression.
Oh, it's the good old circle of fifths.
Yeah.
In minor, so if we're in C minor, this 6th chord is actually a major triad with a major 7 on top of it. With a major 7 on top of it. Yeah. So this is a major 7 chord.
Sweet, soft.
Yeah.
Kind of hazy in the morning, kind of major 7 chord.
Yeah. Yeah. Which can again go to 2. Ooh. Which can then go to 5. And then fall back down to 1.
I didn't experience the same resolution between the 6 and the 2 chord in minor as I did between the 6 and the 2 chord in major. And I guess that's because we're resolving to kind of a diminished chord.
Yeah.
As opposed to...
you don't resolve to a diminished chord, but we're moving to a diminished chord.
Yeah.
So you're absent that sense of resolution. Mm-hmm. That chord that you're supposed to resolve is itself unstable. Mm-hmm. This is something that the late 19th century people just go nuts over, and they would do strings of diminished chords resolving to diminished chords resolving to diminished chords and create chromatic motion. But yeah, pretty pretty neat chords. And in all of these examples, it's, we're adding this sort of depth and flavor that just playing around in triads doesn't get. Triads are a little bland by comparison.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I'm not even playing the bass line most of the time still.
Hey, that's okay, man. A really quick side note. When I was listening to music, I get this musical U. I get up and I do the exercises. We talked about musical U a good bit.
Yeah.
But you kind of spoiled me because when we're doing our harmonic progressions, you're kind of doing a wider stretch of fingering to where the bass line's more prominent. When they're doing their progressions, it's all like 4 closest notes to each other.
They're not cutting you any slack.
No slack, man, and it's really biting me. But I need it.
It's good for you.
But moving on, for the sake of our listeners, let's include some of those lower bass notes if we can.
Okay, all right. I'll attempt to start doing that.
Or don't.
Because
that will be challenging.
Yeah.
If you listen to every episode up into this episode, you might be in a pretty good place to hear this kind of thing.
I think so. Yeah. So the submediate wants to still go to a predominant chord, and it can sometimes pass through 4. It can go from 6 to 2, like we just did.
Yep.
It could get to 6 it could go to 2 by passing through 4.
Oh,
right.
6, 4, 2.
Yeah, 6 to 4, 2.
Okay.
Or it can get to 4 by passing through 2, 6 to 4. That kind of thing. It doesn't often go to from 6 straight to 5.
Oh.
Yeah, because parallel fifths are likely to occur when moving from any root position 6 to any root position 5. So you can do some inversions and get parallel fourths instead.
I see.
And that's better. Yeah. But directly from root position 6 to root position 5 can be kind of tough. So it doesn't happen a whole lot.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Before we move on to the 1, can we hear what it sounds like to go from a 6 to a 4 to a 2 to a 5?
Yeah, let's see if I can put in some bass notes now.
And some sevenths in there?
Yeah. All right.
It's a handful, I know, Matt.
So, we are in... Did I mention that no one would ever call me a pianist?
Yes.
Okay.
We covered that disclaimer.
So, we're in good old C. Like I said. We're in C.
Okay.
And we're going to go 6, 7. Right? Pass through 4. Right? So, and I made this a first inversion 4 chord. So I could just keep that A there.
Yeah.
See how easy this is? Your voices don't even have to move.
Yeah, I didn't hear much of a change.
Yeah. So 6 to 4, to 2. I bet I could keep that A still there. Yeah, and then move down to 5. Yeah, and then 1.
Okay.
See, I was so worried about playing bass notes. I only had to play 1 through the whole that whole thing. Wasn't that great?
You cheated with your theory brain.
With my theory brain, yeah. So I just did a 6, 6, 5, moving to 4, 6, moving to 2, 6, 4, which then resolved down to root position 5 to 1. So that A, so just. And I just got to keep that A there.
Wow.
I was pretty impressed with myself on that. Too bad I'll forget it in 5 minutes.
Had kind of what's called a pedal effect, right?
Kind of a pedal effect. Yeah. And this is why we do inversion, so we can do cool stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, and inversions like 7 chords can give a certain amount of color and flavor to what you're doing.
Oh, it turns out I'm a big fat liar.
What's that?
I had one more question about the 6th chord before we move
okay.
on. Okay, so in minor, I have that sometimes we have the occurrence of the sharp 6 diminished 7 chord.
The sharp 6 diminished 7 chord. Do you probably mean raising that flat 6 in a minor to a natural chord?
Yes. Did the chord that I just say exist at all? Was that gibberish? Or is that the same
it
thing?
was maybe not the way it's typically called.
Let's call it what's proper.
What you're talking about is something called modal mixture. So we're basically making a 6 chord from
A borrowed.
From the major scale.
Okay.
You could do that. So if we have a 6 chord, but if we make it a 6/7, so we've got a 6/7 chord, but we raise that note, you will create a half diminished 7.
Okay.
A the note, A half diminished 7. So raise 6, half diminished 7.
Okay.
So and this would be, I guess, sort of like a melodic minor 6 chord.
Okay.
But for my money, I would still resolve it to 2, to 5, or even 7.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Or what have you.
Okay. So it's still functioning as a 6 chord.
Yeah.
Very nice. But you're just borrowing that note from the major scale. Right?
Yeah, and this is all about
Sharp
context.
6.
You see a sharp, you see A natural in the key of C minor, and something's going on. What do you want to call that? It'll depend on the context of the piece of music you're writing or the piece of music you're looking at. If you're writing it, you may not care what to call it. It sounds good, and you're going to do it.
Right.
Totally fair.
And is it possible one theorist might call it something, and another theorist might call it something else?
100% that is possible.
Okay.
Yes.
Very good.
Yeah. So that's the 6/7.
Very nice.
And then the 1/7 is an interesting chord.
Yeah. Yeah.
The 1/7 in major is a major 7 chord, obviously. And in the minor, obviously, is a minor 7. This is in my ears anyway. This is a very jazz chord. I think jazz when I hear this chord.
Absolutely.
Either one of them. That was not jazz, but
Hundreds and hundreds of jazz pieces start off on a 1/7 chord, right?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of jazz ballads will start right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then kind of, I don't know. And then. I'm writing a jazz ballad. You hear that? Yeah.
And you actually resolved on a 1 major 7 chord, but it still sounded not like a resolution.
Yeah. This is not a chord that is common in classical music.
Yeah.
And I mean not. It's practically practically forbidden.
New deal for the new century, for a new century.
Yeah, because in classical music terms, this 100% obstructs whether this is a tonic chord or not. In classical music terms, a tonic chord is supposed to be a resting place, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not supposed to have
question marks.
Yeah. So this is really not a chord you see in classical music. But obviously in jazz, like we said, in jazz that 7th note almost isn't considered a question mark. It's just considered a wistful coloring.
Yeah.
They think of the 7th as a consonance in jazz. Mm-hmm. So it's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll tend to obey those rules. Jazz tends to obey the basic circle of 5th progression rules and things like that as classical music anyway.
Yes.
They're just sort of ignoring some of the more, you might call them nitpicky kind of the tonic has to resolve, kind of stuff.
Stern, stiff.
Stern, stiff, sour face. This is not right. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Which is, of course, not how they thought of it. They just had a different idea of what good was.
Now, in jazz, of course, and pop music as well, how often does compared to the major 7, the major minor 7 chord in a major key?
Yeah.
Is that for the 1?
Yeah.
Is that a fairly common thing? I know in blues, it happens a lot, right?
Like major minor 7, yeah. It's kind of funny. In jazz and blues, you'll have this chord, and this chord has a real tendency to move to a 4, right? Mm-hmm. This is a real common blues progression, right? Mm-hmm. And then it'll move back. And it's pretty common in jazz, too.
Mm-hmm.
you'll see that in classical music.
Yep.
But when you're music theory nerds, you don't call that one major minor 7 because that is a dominant 7. And when it's a dominant 7,
it's a 5.
Right. So you will call that 5/7
Of 4. Yeah.
Moving to 4/7.
So we just had ourselves a subdominant moment. Not necessarily a modulation.
We had ourselves a secondary dominant.
Secondary dominant moment.
Yeah. So whereas, in jazz, you call that 1 minor 7 moving to 4, no problem. And you'll see it in classical music too, but
1 major minor 7, right?
Yeah, major minor 7. You'll AKA dominant 7.
Yes.
You'll see that in classical music too. It's just when dealing with classical music and tonal harmony, theorists will say, "Oh no, that is not 1 major minor 7 moving to 4. That is 5/7 of 4 moving to 4."
Secondary dominant.
Yeah, and secondary, same chord progression. Do you want to be a classical person or do you want to be a jazz person?
Depends on the circumstance.
Depends on circumstance and context, and that's actually that chord, that 5/7 of 4, if you call it. Mozart and Beethoven and people will use that in the retransitions, in the recapitulation of sonata form, which we haven't talked about yet. But so what'll happen is in one part of the music they'll play music that modulates to the dominant key. But then in the end of the music, they'll play that music again, but they don't want it to modulate. So where there was a 4, there will be a 5/7 of 4, and it'll just twist it back around, and then you can say 4 and then 5/1 and stay in the same key.
Right. Okay.
So yeah. So yeah, you'll see that. You'll see that a lot. Moving from 1 to 4 is a very common blues thing, obviously. Moving from 1 minor 7 to 4 minor 7. Common blues, common in jazz too. Definitely a fun chord and something that if you're playing jazz, this is basically your 1 chord. If you're playing jazz or blues, this is basically your 1 chord. You're not going to play a lot of 1 triads.
Right.
So the last one is a good old 3/7 chord. And it is in the major key, it is a minor 7 chord.
Our old friend.
Yeah, and then in the minor key, it is going to be a
major 7 chord.
But the median generally wants to either go to some kind of predominant, like 4 or 2, or it typically is sort of thought of as sort of a substitution for 1 in some context. So just be back in the major key version here. This can become a 1 chord very, very easily, right? So
2 common tones.
Yeah. And I can just keep that bass note where it is again. Yeah, I was doing that right. So pretty easy. Same thing will happen in a minor chord. So for this reason, it'll often, you sort of see it as a substitute for 1, and 1 will become 3, which will then become 1. That'll happen a lot. If that's not happening, then it's probably going to some subdominant, or rather some predominant chord.
Okay.
Can
we hear that 1, 3 in minor? See what?
Yeah, 1 to 3 in minor. So if we're in minor,
So the 3/7, that is.
Yeah, and then we're just moving to 1. Yeah. So it's really kind of interesting. You can take. Let's see if I were to do this. And then you're really just taking this B flat and D and making it a C, right? And if I really just felt like I needed to move that bass note, kind of sounds like the sad part of a Woody Allen movie or something. But
I'm not even gonna do my Woody Allen impression. Not gonna do it. Not gonna do it. I'll do my George Bush impression to not do my Woody Allen impression. By Dana Carvey doing George Bush. Well, I think it's time for a recap.
All right, recapping it.
Oh.
So basically, these are all just... The takeaway is you can make anything a 7 chord. More or less, right?
Yeah.
You can have a 7/7 chord.
Yes.
And which adds a little flavor to the 7 chord, which is a dominant functioning chord, wants to go to 1 generally, right? It's very, very closely related to the 5. Just a couple of notes difference.
Right.
Just one note's different between a 5 chord, a 5/7 chord. So they have the same function. They're very similar. It's very fluid to go from 7 to 5 or to make a 7 a 5. But it will want to go to 1.
Right. So, and also we've discussed that in the major key, the 7 chords, the 7/7 chord is typically a half diminished.
Half diminished diatonic, yeah.
Whereas in the minor key, natural minor
is a major chord.
It's a major chord.
Yeah.
But in that harmonic minor, in which we raise that scale degree 7.
Yeah, in the harmonic minor in which we raise that scale degree 7, it will become a fully diminished chord.
Wow. Okay. Great.
Yeah.
And also, we're listing these in order of kind of pertinence or of
sure.
not importance. Nothing's more important than the next, but more common, I think.
In the order of commonly found. Even starting back in episode 32, at 5/7, the absolute most common. 2/7, pretty much as common, and now 7/7 definitely common.
And
still
fourth most common.
Fourth most common, slightly less common, is the 4/7. Major 7 in a major mode, minor 7 in a minor mode. Like this subdominant, it'll want to go to 5 or 7.
Yeah.
And we'll sometimes get there by passing through a 2.
Yeah.
So you'll see 4/7, 2/6/5, or some kind of 2/7 to 5, to 1. These still obey the circle of fifths.
Yes.
Right. Circle of fifths is still a thing.
Right.
It's still obey all of the counterpoint rules of triads. The 7th has its own kind of new one in that the 7th chords have to resolve down. The 7th of the chord has to resolve down in all of these.
And you know what that little whole tone riff means? It means that future Jeremy has come back to intervene in this podcast. Going back and editing this episode, I realized that in the recap here, we left out the 4 and the 6 chords. So I'm going to hit those right now and then return back to my other time frame. The 4/7 chord in major is typically a major 7 chord. And in minor, it is typically a minor 7 chord. Now, the subdominant, like its triad, the subdominant 7 chord, like its triad, wants to go to the 5 or to the 7, sometimes passing through a 2 chord along the way. And then the 6 chord is often a minor 7 chord in the major key, and then is a major 7 chord in the minor keys. The submediant 7 chord wants to, like its triad, go to a predominant chord, sometimes passing through a subdominant or a supertonic, that being a 4 or a 2 chord, to get there. And when moving from root position 5 to root position, and when moving from root position 6 to root position 5, you might want to use inversions because often you can run into parallel fifths, which can sometimes be considered a voice-leading no-no. Okay, well, having said that, I'm going to take off and get back to Past Matt as he talks about the 1 chord. Take it away, Past Matt.
The 1 chord, a 1/7, is of course a major 7 chord in the major key, and a minor 7 chord in the minor key. This is not a chord you see in a lot of classical music. It just kind of breaks too many of the fundamental precepts of counterpoint. But in jazz music and in popular music, and especially in blues music, it's very, very common. It basically is your 1 chord. I mean, I can't think of a lot of blues music that uses just a tonic triad.
Yeah.
That would feel kind of lame in that.
Blues music, I often think more often you'll hear that dominant 7 or that major minor 7 in the 1 chord, where jazz may be more common. You might hear this major 7 in a major key.
Yeah.
1 chord. So
probably the most divergent. Really not even used in one style. Really almost kind of just typical and basic in another style.
But a very cool and unique kind of sound.
Absolutely. And then there's a 3/7, And like the median, it still wants to go to some kind of predominant chord, or like the median triad, it can still be sort of thought of as a substitution for one. So you can go back and forth from the 1 to the 3 pretty smoothly.
Yeah.
And like I said, all of these chords still in classical tonal harmony anyway are still going to conform to the idea of the circle of fifths. We're still 1 4 7 3 6 2 5 1. We're still kind of going to go through that motion.
Yeah. Oh, and moving back just a little bit, one thing we should also mention about the 1 chord is when it's the 7th chord, what's happening also is it's kind of being sapped of its tonality.
Yeah.
That's why in classical music we don't really think
we don't like to do that.
We can't think of that as a tonic.
Yeah.
It's blasphemy.
It's being sapped of its tonicness.
Yeah.
With that chord. But in jazz, a 7 chord is considered a consonant, just like a triad. It's not really even considered a dissonant. So it's really kind of not being sapped of its tonicness necessarily, in jazz. Or if it is, it's not as important as the color and flavor of the chord, which is very nice and attractive.
Well, it's like you said, by that time in music, this sonority was kind of considered to be more pleasant or more consonant.
Yeah, it's kind of funny how we started off. We only wanted to hear one note at a time, like literally.
Yeah.
Gregorian chant was monophony.
Yeah.
Right. We got to where we could deal with octaves.
Then
we got to where we could deal with octaves and fifths. And then the 3rd crept in, and for a long time that was it. Now the 7th has started creeping in the 20th century. So it's kind of interesting how our ears sort of evolved to tolerate more as the centuries move on.
Yeah.
It'd be a good topic to consider one day.
At some point, our babies are going to be crying and we'll be like,
we don't even, listen, yeah.
That tritone sounds so sweet.
That tritone is just so, yeah.
He's probably in a good mood.
Yeah.
He's singing to me.
Do you think that's what Schoenberg felt?
Maybe so. Does Schoenberg have any children? Any surviving children?
Oh, I don't even know. I don't even know.
That's getting kind of dark. We should end it on a dark note.
Or 7, fully diminished 7.
Yeah. Oh, and we also talked about how the fully diminished chord was considered symmetrical.
Yeah.
Or intervallic.
Because it divides of the chromatic scale of all 12 notes. It divides that scale into 4 equal portions.
Yeah.
Which is kind of neat. And what that means in practice is there really is no root to a fully diminished 7 chord, or at least any of those 4 notes could be the root.
Yes.
Of the diminished 7 chord.
Yeah, because they're all kind of equal distances from each other.
Yeah, we tend to want to slap the word root on whatever we thought of first. But you can play around with inharmonic equivalents and show that any of those could be the root.
So modulation and secondary 7th chord possibilities begin to really open up because you can be a 7 of one of any 3 or 4 chords.
Yeah, absolutely.
Crazy stuff.
So I hope this has given you guys some and girls some great inspiration to go play around with some 7 chords.
Yeah, I shied away from them for the longest time just because I didn't need that extra mess in my head.
Right.
But now that I'm getting to learn them better and embrace them, I'm really seeing their purpose and how they really add a whole different color and character to music.
Yeah, without really fundamentally breaking how music works. They add a lot more depth and a lot more color.
So, all right, we will pick it up again in a couple of weeks, and hope you guys have had a great summer. We're getting back into the school world.
Oh, yeah.
Some of us are anyways. Just another week for me. But we'll keep cranking them out if you guys keep listening.
Stay tuned.
Pretty cool sounds, huh? Try and use some of them in your own music and let us know how it goes at musicstudent101.com. And don't forget, you too can be like Eamon Kelly and support us at patreon.com/musicstudent101. Thanks for listening.